So you logged on Twitter.com and found some video games discourse. Listen, we all care very, very deeply about indie games across the board, whether they're big or small. But there is continuing to be a cyclical problem within our industry, where indies basically get next to no discoverability. Despite the successes of things like Indie Game the Movie and a myriad of documentaries going into what actually it takes to make a game, like People Make Games or NoClip, there's still a real lackluster response to the games that are right in front of us every day. And this is super frustrating because more than anything, it hurts the most marginal developers around us and developers in new developing markets all over around the world. And the thing is, saturation is a myth. Indie-pocalypse as it stands is kind of almost an inside joke at this point. We're well aware that platforms like itch can be swimming in an ocean of titles, and yet many of the greatest works still rise to the top and can get noticed when people go looking for them. We can't simply algorithmically solve our way out of this problem. We need people with impassioned, bold, emotional connections to the games that they're trying to show to the world. People who are just as connected, if not more so, than the developers who made these games, who can articulate and put forward why those games were important in the first place. This, of course, sits very near and dear to me as someone who spent many years, since 2018, covering really small indies and seeing just how disconnected they were from the press cycle. They don't have the time and energy to be able to put together press kits all the time. They don't have the press contacts necessary to even know who to email or to reach out to. And even if they do, speaking as even a journalist working on a very small site like I did, the problem fundamentally became the simple fact that there were more emails than I even had time to look at, let alone sift through, find out what was worth playing, and being able to share that with the world. I did my best, and I spent many years writing impassioned articles that served to be as a sort of companion piece to the games that were played, almost as something you would read both to entice you into it and something to reflect on after your playing experience. But it's really hard to get that kind of writing motivation and ability and have editors who respect that if you aren't getting paid fairly. And this is the problem. Fundamentally, the model of how we review, talk about, and communicate new titles that show up in our industry every day is flawed. And there's no easy way around it. We've been relying off of ad revenues for years, and since the decline of ad revenue, thanks to things like the Facebook video fiasco, there's not really been an opportunity to rebound from that, and it's super frustrating. YouTube has plenty of compilations of 10 top indie games, Blue Drake 42 going in there and being like, this game is going to blow your mind. And then Errant Signal doing little roundups that are trying to be impassioned pleas to please talk about and cover games, right? Errant Signal even talks about it in those videos. The metrics just don't add up. And if someone who's been at that for a decade can't even manage to make that work, then what hope do any of the rest of us have? What hope do small independent developers have if they are only able to enter their ticket into a massive lottery that may or may not benefit them in the long run? And if they are brought forth out of obscurity, how much success is that really going to bring them? Is it going to break even? Are they going to make their costs back? There's many examples of games like Caves of Cud literally eclipsing their lifetime sales over many years with just one YouTuber putting out a video with less than 1 million subscribers. And that's not to say that critical thought and video essays don't get the attention that they should. It's very specifically the way that we present bundles of small games outward. A lot of what we talk about when we even present these games to the public, be it in written word or video format, is we talk about how these games are free and great, or we talk about how this game is going to blow your mind, and then we only drop a link somewhere buried in the description after our own ad sponsorships. And it's frustrating. It's deeply frustrating. These people pour their hearts into a game for 3, sometimes 9 months, maybe even years. And most of the time, we're talking about marginal artists who don't have access to the traditional pipelines necessary to even get any recognition, let alone financial sales. And just getting eyeballs on your game doesn't mean it's necessarily going to convert into financial profit or even breaking even. And that's the frustrating part about all of this. We're penalizing some of the best, most artistic minds of our generation and generations to come because we simply can't think of a solution around this. It's kind of a bleak time to be a small game developer. The tools are easier than ever. The press is there and hungry for the latest viral hits. Self-publishing is easier than it has ever been, even more so than the tools to make these games. And that leaves you wondering, well, what's so bleak about it then? And it's simply the fact that, despite all of that, there is basically no way to get even remotely noticed without spending years building connections. But if there are small games that you care about very deeply and you would love to see get out there and get success, especially if those games come from diverse authors, then we really need to make it a point to uplift them, elevate them, tweet about them, rant about them to your friends, quote tweet the original developer's account when they're talking about their game launch or linking to their Steam page or itch.io, and then signal boost it to your friends and DM it to critics you see that are like taking in like ideas for games to review and talk about. Because that stuff does and can make a huge difference. And this is the other thing. It's going to fundamentally take a shift in how we view the relationships between journalists and game developers. Small independent journalists are going to have to work hand in hand with small independent game devs, and they're going to have to build a social circle and a framework where they can signal boost internally with each other what's good and what's not. Unfortunately, just the model we have right now of scouring YouTube or just simply trying to wade through my email inbox with the limited amount of time that most of us have isn't going to work. It was genuinely a full-time job just to try and get a hold of creative, interesting games that I could find the time to write about, let alone manage to play through all the way, or even play through things that have metatextual components, multiple endings, and so on. And a great example of that would be How Are Fish Made, a game that I literally would not have known about its brilliance had it not been for the only channel to really truly rival my pace at writing about games, alphabetagamer.com. Those people are literally, I think, working around the clock, and I have no idea how they make their money. But they have an incredible YouTube channel you should absolutely check out that showcases so many incredible games. The point being, this is an infrastructural problem predominantly, and it is a problem of mutual aid and community building. If we don't even know each other exists, and we don't operate as good neighbors in the development community alongside our journalistic peers, how are we going to get anywhere, let alone get audiences to look at us? Just because your game isn't selling and just because your articles aren't getting read in quite the quantities that you think it should be, doesn't mean that your audience isn't there. It just means they're lost somewhere out in the algorithmic slurry. And platforms like Twitter make it harder and harder every day to get found. So push back against monetization, at least in the traditional methods. Opt for subscription-based platforms like Ko-fi. Because honestly, that stuff really makes a difference. So many developers have now switched their model from being almost sort of one-off original pieces to more of a games as a service thing, which I have mixed feelings on. But if it enables these small garage indies to make a living and actually be able to experiment just because an audience really settles into liking their branding, their sort of boutique label vibe, then I think we have a bright future ahead of us. And you can look to companies like New Blood Interactive or even other smaller labels out there like the Sock Pop Collective. And hey, if anything, Death Stranding taught us that you can make a AAA walking simulator and find a huge global audience that's craving for so much more we might be getting a sequel. So take that as you will and take it to heart. Hopefully that will help you out there in the barren wastes of this indie-pocalypse. And speaking of indie-pocalypse, make sure you go support Pizza Pranks. They've been pushing through this work and doing wonderful commission games, making sure that artists get paid at least a little bit for the little small vignettes that they create. The only solution is us, unfortunately. No one is coming out of the woodwork to be the next big hit Kotaku, IGN, whatever, that's going to suddenly light the way to small indie games. I myself got into writing in the first place because Rock, Paper, Shotgun had amazing indie columns that have since kind of gone the way of the dodo. So until then, I hope this message finds you well and maybe sheds a little light on the problem from someone with a lot of experience trying to tackle it. And please, whatever you do, look for games outside of the North American and UK bubble. There's so many incredible, amazing games coming out of Southeast Asia, Europe, Eastern Europe that are just getting overlooked all the time. Not to mention South America. Brazil, Chile, Argentina, they all have amazing game development scenes, and they are completely being overlooked. Not to mention the entire continent of Africa that has such a blossoming game scene as we speak. There's people coming out of there with such incredible, unbelievable talent, it blows me away. One of my favorite developers is Studio Leomingas that comes out of India, and they make some of the most emotional experiences that have made me just sob at my computer trying to write a tweet review. These games deserve your attention. These games deserve your love and support, because if these developers don't get it and they don't know that there's an audience for them, they're going to get discouraged. They're going to go work in software. They're going to retreat and stop making games. They'll disappear entirely, and we will lose a generation of voices from our artistic medium. Also, we can have more Call of Duty corridor shooting titles. I don't know about you, but as much as I appreciate run and gun shooting games, I think we deserve better, and I think they deserve better too.